Alright, we are here with the N62 services we're doing today, repairing the valve cover leaks. So we got valve cover gaskets and upper timing cover gaskets. We're also going to reseal this brake vacuum pump, and yeah, I think that's about it. Radiator hose is leaking, and we're going to fix that for him today as well. So this job pays about 10.5 hours, and there's quite a bit of work. So we're going to have to get this wiring harness loosened up. There's a couple connectors down on this side that kind of run to the AC compressor. That's kind of difficult to get to. You can kind of just leave those loose. If you can't disconnect them, you will have enough room to move the harness out of the way. Alternator is going to need to be loosened because there is a timing cover bolt tucked behind the alternator. So take the drive belt off and then just start unplugging all these electrical connectors. You got your Vanos solenoids down here that you need to disconnect. Alternator needs to be disconnected, your signal and your power wire. And other than that, disconnect all your crankcase, get your valvetronic motors off. You may want to loosen your power steering reservoir. You may want to loosen, I took this air box out. This air box shouldn't really be in the way, but you might need to move over this expansion tank to give you some room. Air box might come out if I find it's easier. Intake manifold does not technically need to come off, but you need to remove the fuel rail to get the valve cover clearance. However, I don't really like fucking with the O-rings, losing them, or there's a fuel leak after I go back together. Unless if you're replacing all the O-rings, I find it easier just to take the intake off. A lot of people will not take it off to do the job, but if you do take the intake off, you'll have a better vision of your valley pan and any coolant leaks that might be going on under there that you can fix, instead of going back together and having a coolant leak later on. So this is where we're at right now. Obviously the engine bulkhead micro filters are gonna have to come off. Disconnect your battery, and fuel line is going to need to be disconnected right here. As a matter of fact, it kind of looks like we have some leakage going on here that we should probably address. There is a little hack that you can do. There is a rubber coating on this fuel line. If you remove that rubber coating with a pick or knife, cut it off, 9 out of 10 times I see that actually resolve this leak. And this leak doesn't look too bad, but I do smell fuel, so I'm gonna have to address that later on. And other than that, yeah, I'm gonna start taking things apart and we'll see how it goes. Your crankcase ventilation diaphragm are gonna be here, and shit, I thought there was 2 of them. There's only 1. Okay, so that's going to be here. Pop this cover off without breaking it and check that diaphragm. Make sure it's not torn, because that will also give you crankcase problems. So, all right. Another thing I forgot to mention is this sensor is very fragile. We're not even close to pulling this cover off. I haven't even done nothing. But this sensor will break 9 out of 10 times if this is your first time doing this job. I found that if you loosen one of the motor mounts or both the motor mounts and jack the engine up, you can kind of raise each bank individually, and as you raise the bank, it'll kind of help you fish this cover out. So then I'll do bank 1, put it back together, drop the engine, and then jack up this side, do bank 2, or I think I got it switched up, so bank 1 and bank 2, and you just do one side at a time. That's my easiest way around the clearance issue, because it is very extremely tight, and like I said, you 100% need to take this bulkhead off. So we're gonna get started. I'll probably loosen both engine mounts just to make sure. If I do decide to jack the engine up, I ain't gotta do that later on. I like to get everything ready before I start. So I'm gonna start working at it, and we'll be back here in just a moment for you, probably not so much a moment for me, but we'll see. Alrighty, and battery is behind this compartment. Just unscrew your jack and take that out. Also, fuel pump fuse should be this guy here. Typically it's a 20 amp and it's isolated at the back of the fuse box. 73. 73. Yeah, so that's your fuse pump fuel right there. Pretty easy to find. If you want, you can go ahead and pull it. No fuel is going to come out, but I also disconnect your battery if you are feeling lazy. And you don't want to get the jack out. I guess you could technically just unplug this guy behind here, and that'll also kill all the power to your motor. Another thing you could do to make your work a little bit cleaner with that fuel pump fuse disconnected, we could come in here real quick, start the car, kind of bleed off any residual fuel pressure. So now when you take those lines apart, it should be much cleaner. All right, so we have the purge valve off. I always find it easier, instead of disconnecting the brackets, leave the brackets in place and take the screws out. That'll make a quicker installation. You want to leave things as one piece as much as you can. So we'll put that aside. And also, here is that diaphragm I was talking about. This one seems to be in good condition, but these are really cheap, and if they're torn, you are going to want to get a new one, because these engines can show symptoms of this being turned, and other engines don't show as many symptoms. I'm not sure why that is, but one thing they all have in common is you will be burning oil if these are torn. So just give them a look, and pop in a new one if necessary. Okay, and on this variant of the N62, I guess there is two of them. This one is not on the valve cover, however. A lot of the times you'll find it on the valve cover here. As I was moving this crankcase hose, I saw where the bank 1 diaphragm was. So I already looked at this one, it was in good condition. And this came covered in this foam, so we'll replace this foam afterwards. Both diaphragms are not torn, and that should not be an issue. So, yeah. All right, and like I said, we're disassembling as little as possible. So instead of taking that 10mm nut, moving that coolant line out of the way, I just take the bolts off the brake vacuum. And this hose is very brittle, and I could tell someone's already been fucking with it, because that's not an original clamp right there. So hopefully, this line does have a little bit of flexibility, but it's not that flexible, so you got to be careful. But you can typically just pull it off, tuck it down to the side here, and brake vacuum's not in our way no more. All right, this is kind of gross in here. Make sure to get everything a good clean. That's kind of opinion oriented, because some people don't care, but your tools will get really gunky and your hands are going to get gunky, and yeah, I don't like working messy. So give everything a good clean, get all that fucking residual oil off, and clean everything once it's off the car, and you know, just work clean. That's how I like to work. So yeah, man, we're gonna spray all this shit down real quick. All right, another tip is for these Vanos connectors that go to the timing cover, to the Vanos solenoids, you cannot mix these up. So I normally just go top to bottom. I put a zip tie on the top. If I see the zip tie when I'm going back together, I know that one goes to the top. Also, when you pull out these solenoids, you're gonna want to make sure they're clean. There's no debris, there's no dirt. Just spray them with some brake cleaner prior to going back in, and always replace these gaskets, because they will leak a lot. So there we are. As I mentioned, I put a zip tie on the top connector. Typically, it's pretty straightforward which goes to which, but this harness is kind of in rough condition, and I'm also seeing some copper wires showing, so we're going to clean these and take care of that issue before it becomes an issue. You know, right there too, I see copper wire exposed, so we're going to clean this up and repair this harness, because something little like that, you could go back together and have a fault code afterwards and not know what you did wrong, and really you didn't really do anything wrong, but you just didn't have that attention to detail coming apart. So I'm sure this side of the harness is in much better condition, as a matter of fact, as you can see. And like I said, it's kind of straightforward, because the short wire will lead naturally where it wants to go, and the longer wire will naturally kind of find its way. But the condition of this guy, I didn't want to take a chance of mixing this up, so I do mark anything to make installation quicker and easier, so you don't got to second guess anything. All right, so here we are. Got the harness pretty much separated. There are 2 or 3 connectors holding this guy on the back that goes to the intake manifold. I had to figgle these fuel lines around to get this ignition harness off. This ignition harness runs over here to the side. Also, I loosened this guy here gave me a little bit of room. You got to be extremely careful with this bolt. I stopped without taking this one all the way out. I'm sure it clears, but I was scared I was going to crack the valve cover, as you can see, so be extremely careful with that. These guys come down. I loosen this junction box so I can lift this up a little bit further. Ignition harness, like I said, can just be wrapped over to the side. You do got these screws that act as grounds, and if you do not put those grounds back, you will fry this harness. Unfortunately, that's just how this engine is. So we're going to get everything out of the way. We're going to keep working. Have not taken the drive belt off yet. That's next. I will loosen the alternator and pull up the intake and see if we got any leaks going on underneath there, because these hoses are prone to leaking, and also your valley pan is underneath there, and if that's leaking, that's a big problem. After you pressure test it, you should take a look at this weep hole. That's a notorious failure that, to repair properly, the cylinder head needs to come off, which is absolutely insane, but they do make aftermarket shims that you can replace the pipe with. So we're going to get this off and take a look underneath it. Vanos is coming off. When you move these off, they are spring loaded. You can put the Vanos units, these are not Vanos, these are valvetronic, my bad. You could put the valvetronic units into a service mode, but they are spring loaded, so just back these bolts out evenly and hold some pressure on it. When it pops out, it is going to shoot out. And when you put them back in, leave the ignition on for about 10 to 20 seconds, and they're automatically going to relearn themselves. You shouldn't need any special scanner to reassemble them. So here we are. Brake vacuum, I ended up zip tying it, so this line is naturally falling over here with the weight of the pump. You know, use some common sense, get things out of your way. Bungee cord, those guys over, of course. So here we are. We're going to cover up these holes so nothing fall in, obviously. Once you get the intake off, be very careful. Count these inserts. You see there's no insert here, there's no insert here, there's one insert, there's no insert here, there's two inserts, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now come over to your motor. Make sure these do not fall in the intake. 1, 2, 3. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like one's missing. That was probably a previous fuck up that someone made a mistake on. Unless if I missed it. Yeah, so it looks like it was running without one. And as long as it's not in that intake, pretty good. Yeah, so I'm gonna inspect all of these, make sure that we don't have one of those in the fucking motor. Kind of curious as to why one's missing, but we can go on from there. Alright, so now we're removing the bolts from the valve cover. If you look, there are two different lengths. Now, the ones on the outside of the cover, closest to the firewall of the car, so these guys down on this side are going to be shorter, as you can tell, and the ones on the inside of the motor are going to be longer, and then two of them are going to be threaded, and that's for the ground screws that go there and there. So make sure when you're putting these back together, you don't mix them up. As you can see, ground screws go next to your valvetronic motor, and that's the ignition harness ground. The short ones go down here, the long ones go up here, and also these are actual bolts, they're not just studs, so it's hard to mix those up. And you have one more in the back of the motor, right back there. All right, your motor mounts can be accessed there, as you can see, and here, as you can see. Get both of those guys loose. Put your jack underneath. Now this step is optional. Block of wood, of course. Always use a block of wood, and take a look for your oil level sensor. Make sure you don't crush that sensor. And as you can see, as you jack the motor up, it'll almost give you more room in a sense. And right there is about all we can do. We're starting to lift the actual car off the ground, so stop right there. You don't want to fucking go too crazy, but that is going to help you get this off 100%. All right. And like I said, clearance is difficult, but I'm going to show you guys it's possible to get this out. And this eccentric shaft sensor is prone to breaking. Almost anyone who does this first time is going to break this sensor. I'm going to show you with this method. You have plenty of room. It's going to seem like a source of trickery, but I've just done this so many times. Plenty of room to get past that sensor without damaging anything. And to prove my point, I'll even go ahead, put this back on. See? This is your first time, and if you don't do the motor mount trick, this is going to be very difficult to clear that sensor and get the valve cover off. But it is doable. So we're going to clean this up. We're going to renew all the gaskets on it. This gasket's getting replaced. This gasket's getting replaced. Obviously the valve cover gasket gets replaced. All of these gaskets get replaced. They're probably going to break. So if you were to take a pry bar and clip these off, make sure you go to the underside of the cover and make sure that these guys came off as well, because sometimes they'll stay on the underside, and then when you run the engine, they're going to fall in and just get crushed up by the cam and end up in the oil pickup at some point. These guys are also very prone to breaking. These are clips that guide the valve cover in. If you don't clip these in properly, they'll break and get crushed by the cams, like I said. And also, you're probably going to have a leak and be in the same spot you started. So I'll show you my trick on how I get these seated before I screw the bolts down. Make sure we don't ruin anything. And valve cover tubes are right here. Kind of tempted to leave them in there, but it's also a good idea to replace those with the valve cover. Customer did not want to replace his, so we're going to reuse them. There we go. Surprisingly, this gasket is in excellent condition. I mean, excellent condition. I almost feel like I could clean this off and put it back in. So I have a feeling that this valve cover leak was installation related, meaning these clips were not seated and it was leaking tons of oil. But timing cover gaskets do not look like they've been serviced anytime soon, so those are actually causing a leak, and we're going to replace that. I already got the alternator bolted to the side. All you have to do is take the top bolt out. Don't worry about the bottom bolt. There is a pulley that you need to remove to access the bottom bolt, but then you can just take a pry bar right in between here and just slide it over, and that gives you access to stick a E8 right through here to get to that bolt. As you see, another one here, another one here, another one here, another one here. Keep track of these brackets, because there are brackets that hold your power cable in, and same over here. You got some plastic brackets. I think there's only one over here. Yeah, just keep in mind where you took them from. I believe these bolts and the top bolts here are longer. The bolts that go to the cylinder head, as you can see from the back side. So don't mix those bolts up. Two of them are going to be longer. Two of them are going to be longer over here. You'll have 4 long bolts and a whole bunch of shorter bolts. Okay, and here we are. Clean these surfaces extremely well. Take a look at your head bolts. Take a look at your Vanos units. Make sure you don't see anything crazy. After you get your surfaces clean and prepped, you need to prep the valve cover. These are replacement bolts, the replacement grommets right there. You need to replace these. I'm pretty sure these two guys go to the engine cover. They're like little grommets for the engine cover, and then this is for your valvetronic. We're gonna pop in all new seals. Clean this guy with brake cleaner, compressed air, until you can swab it and come out relatively clean. My little trick I like to use is some spray adhesive. You don't want to go too crazy with this shit because it will make a mess. But we're going to go around here once it's dry and clean and orientate our new gasket into place. That'll make sure it doesn't fall out when we're trying to wiggle it back in. The easiest way to get this gasket lined up is to take a look at these half moons. The half moons are going to go right there. And then before you install, timing cover is not quite on yet, but there is going to be a cut in the surface because this cylinder head has a front timing cover that gets mated like this. So you will need to apply some silicone here, and also put some silicone on these half moons. Just a little bit here, a little bit there. You don't want to go crazy with the silicone because that just ends up in your oil if you put too much. So I'm going to work on prepping this valve cover to get it ready to go on. After I get that prepped, I'm going to let the glue dry to hold that gasket in, and then I'll put the timing cover on, and then RTV up here. Let that sit for, I don't know, 2 minutes to 5 minutes to kind of somewhat harden, and then we'll set the valve cover down. All right, here's the timing cover. You are going to want to replace these gaskets, like I said, and I like to put them in now with lots of grease because it will make your life easier. As you'll notice, when you're trying to put them in the car, you can't really see them, and you might have something like this going on. I did this on purpose just to demonstrate. So make sure that everything is seated. And you see how I'm moving that slightly. You don't want any play in these. So the grease obviously is going to help you get your new solenoids in, or your old solenoids. You shouldn't be replacing solenoids unless they're bad. But the grease kind of going to hold it in place, and it'll also make installation easier. Because like I said, when it's on the car, it's very easy to pinch these. And it's also wise, after you get ready to put the solenoids in, take a mirror and make sure nothing shifted. So here we go. Okay, timing covers are now in. You see I put a bead of silicone there, bead of silicone there, very light. And you need to put a bead of silicone on these half moons back here. As you can see, a little tricky to get to. But you need a little bit of silicone there, and right there, and right there. That one came out a little lot, but that's okay. And now, ready to put on this valve cover. Okay, and this is how I get the valve cover seated to make sure those clips go in that I was talking about earlier. Put your 2 ground screws here. I say ground screws because they are threaded. Screw them by hand. Don't even put a wrench on them. Once you got those tight by hand, grab a pry bar and press forward on this guy. With this guy being pressed forward, now you could take the short bolts. I'm going to need 2 hands, so I'm going to stop recording, and thread them in by hand, like I said, preferably all 4 of them by hand, and then you can start to torque it in sequence. So there we go. This clip should be pretty seated, and after we do this, we need to go around with the mirror to make sure the gasket is truly seated. Okay, now I'm in by hand. If you do not put these on properly, you will hear a crack as you tighten these. So as you can hear, there is absolutely no crack. You don't want to hear a crack. Okay, so this valve cover should be seated properly. And now we just reassemble. That's about all there is to it. Okay, this valve cover is all done. Only thing you got to do now, go around with the mirror, make sure your gasket looks good, especially in the back here, and down on the side over here. Make sure you don't see anything crazy. This gasket looks like it's seated just about perfectly. Come over back here, just take a look at the half moons. And everything looks good. Okay, we got the belt back on, and the alternator bolted up, and this side is exactly the same. The only tip I have on this side is if you're resealing this brake vacuum, it's pretty easy. Just take the bolts out, and there's a O-ring in there that you need to replace when you put it back together. You might want to use some silicone or adhesive spray to hold that O-ring in place, because it kind of does stretch a little bit and it likes to pop out. And once you have this valve cover off, it might be easier to line up the brake vacuum pump with the camshaft, maybe turn the engine so it's in a vertical position, and line it up, put it in, pull it back out, and then when you get the valve cover on, you shouldn't have to fight this, because this needs to be orientated perfectly with the camshaft. If you look in here, you can see the camshaft has a notch, and you need to put that notch in there, and it's very difficult. But if you turn the engine by the crank until that's vertical, put this in, and then leave it off to the side like it is now, once you get the valve cover back on, it should just go straight in. And that's it. So bank 2's done. Bank 1 should be easier since you don't have the alternator. However, there is limited amount of space on this side, so use the same trick and you'll be fine.